Here's something they don't tell you about the end of love. Sometimes it doesn't arrive with a bang, a betrayal, or even a fight. Sometimes it just slips away on a random Tuesday afternoon while you're folding laundry, and you realize you've been going through the motions for so long that you've forgotten what it felt like to actually feel something. That's what happened to me. I didn't catch him cheating. He didn't suddenly turn into a monster. There was no dramatic scene worthy of a movie climax. One day, I simply looked at Daniel across our meticulously decorated living room and felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that somehow was more terrifying than heartbreak had ever been. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, back when I still believed love was supposed to hurt a little, back when I thought waiting was the same thing as loyalty. 5 years ago, I met Daniel Chen at a photography exhibit in downtown Seattle. I was there because my best friend Maya had dragged me out of my apartment, insisting that I needed to experience culture instead of spending another Friday night editing grant proposals for the nonprofit where I worked. Daniel was there because he actually cared about art, or so I thought at the time. Later, I'd learn he was there because his business partner's wife was the featured photographer, and networking never sleeps in the tech startup world. He stood in front of a massive black and white photograph of a thunderstorm over the Sound, hands in his pockets, head tilted in that way people do when they're trying to look contemplative. I remember thinking he looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog for successful young professionals who have their lives together. Tailored navy blazer, perfectly tousled dark hair, the kind of watch that costs more than my monthly rent. It's almost pretentious how beautiful it is, isn't it? I said, surprising myself. I'm not usually the type to strike up conversations with strangers, but something about the way he was standing there, so serious, made me want to poke at him a little. He turned, and I got my first look at those eyes. Dark, intelligent, with just a hint of amusement crinkling at the corners. Pretentious beauty, he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. Is that better or worse than humble ugliness? Depends on whether you're the one being pretentious or having to deal with someone who is. He laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle you give strangers. Daniel, he said, extending his hand. And I'm going to assume you're solidly in the dealing with someone category. Lily, I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, warm, confident. And you're right. I'm definitely not pretentious enough to pull off that blazer. This blazer is armor, he said with mock seriousness. I'm actually terrified of art galleries. All this blank space, all these people pretending to understand things. Give me a solid algorithm any day. So you're a tech guy. Guilty. And let me guess, you're... He paused, studying me with exaggerated intensity. A teacher? No, wait. You work for a nonprofit. Something with environmental conservation or maybe education. I raised an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. You have that look, he said, gesturing vaguely at me. Like you actually care about making the world better. It's refreshing. Most people here are just hunting for tax write-offs and Instagram content. I should have caught it then, that little hint of cynicism, the way he dismissed everyone else so casually. But I was too charmed by the attention, by the way he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. We talked for 2 hours, standing in front of that photograph, then moving through the gallery, our conversation weaving through art and work and life with an ease that felt rare and precious. He got my number. He texted me that same night, just wanted to make sure you didn't give me a fake number. Also, you were right about the storm photo. Pretentiously beautiful. Kind of like this conversation was. I smiled at my phone like an idiot. Maya, sprawled on my couch eating ice cream, caught my expression and groaned. Oh no. That's the face. You're going to fall for him, aren't you? Maybe, I admitted. Would that be so terrible? She studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. Just promise me something. Don't lose yourself, okay? You have a habit of doing that. I laughed it off. I was 27 years old, financially independent, with a solid friend group and a job I loved. How could I possibly lose myself? That's the thing about warnings, though. You never think they apply to you until you're already drowning. The first 6 months with Daniel were the kind of romance that makes you understand why people write songs about love. He took me to restaurants I couldn't pronounce, weekend trips to Portland and Vancouver, late-night walks through Pike Place Market. He listened when I talked about my work, asked thoughtful questions about the literacy programs we were trying to fund. He made me laugh with his dry observations about the absurdity of startup culture, the way his business partner Kyle could turn any conversation into a pitch deck. 3 slides into breakfast this morning, he told me once, Kyle tried to explain why his oatmeal routine was optimizing his cognitive load for maximum morning productivity. I just wanted to eat my eggs in peace. You work with him voluntarily, I pointed out. That's the real mystery, isn't it? He pulled me closer on his couch, pressing a kiss to my temple. Maybe I'm a masochist. Or maybe you're more similar than you want to admit. He pulled back, mock offended. Take it back. Make me. He did, with a kiss that made me forget we were arguing, forget everything except the warmth of his arms and the certainty that this, finally, was what I'd been waiting for. We moved in together after 8 months. His place, because it was bigger, in one of those new buildings in Capitol Hill with floor-to-ceiling windows and a gym nobody used. I should have noticed how little changed when I arrived with my boxes. How my books got relegated to one bookshelf while his business journals spread across every surface. How my vintage movie posters didn't quite fit with his minimalist aesthetic, so they ended up in the spare bedroom/office. We'll redecorate eventually, he promised, kissing my forehead as I stood in the living room, feeling oddly like a guest in my own home. Make it really ours. But right now, with this series of funding round coming up, I'm just slammed. You understand, right? I understood. I always understood. That became my role, the understanding girlfriend. The one who didn't complain when he canceled our dinner plans because of an emergency meeting. The one who smiled through another weekend where he barely looked up from his laptop. The one who convinced herself that this was just temporary, just until the funding came through, just until the product launched, just until the next milestone. The milestones never ended. That's what I didn't understand then. There was always a next thing, always a reason to push our life together into some undefined later. After we close this round, I'll take time off, I promise. We'll go to Thailand like you wanted. Once we hire a proper CTO, I won't have to work these crazy hours. We'll have real weekends again. When things settle down, we'll start really planning our future. Maybe look at getting engaged. I collected his promises like shells on a beach, beautiful and hollow. Meanwhile, my own life started shrinking to fit around his. I took on more of the household responsibilities because he was too busy. I stopped making plans with friends on weekends because he might actually be free, and I didn't want to miss the rare moments when he surfaced from his work. I turned down a promotion that would have required occasional evening events because someone needed to be home, to keep the apartment running, to maintain some semblance of normal life while he chased his dreams. Maya noticed. Of course she did. Lily, when was the last time you came out with us? We invited you to game night 4 times last month. I know, I'm sorry. Things have just been busy. Busy with what? Waiting for Daniel to remember you exist. That's not fair. Isn't it? She set down her coffee cup, fixing me with that look she'd perfected over 15 years of friendship. Name one thing you've done for yourself in the past 3 months. One thing that wasn't about supporting him or maintaining the relationship or just trying to be the cool, understanding girlfriend. I opened my mouth to respond and realized I couldn't. The silence stretched between us, uncomfortable and revealing. I love him, I finally said, and it sounded weak even to my own ears. I know you do, Maya said gently. But does he love you enough? And more importantly, do you love yourself enough to ask for more than scraps? I brushed it off. Made excuses. Promised to do better about staying connected with my friends. But Maya's words lodged themselves somewhere deep, a splinter I couldn't quite reach. Year 2 looked a lot like year 1, just with less pretense. The romantic gestures faded. The thoughtful questions about my work dried up. Date nights became Netflix and takeout, with him scrolling through his phone the entire time, occasionally grunting responses to my attempts at conversation. Sex became routine, then infrequent, then something that happened only when he initiated it, usually late at night when he finally came to bed, more about release than connection. I told myself this was normal. Relationships matured. The butterflies faded. This was just what long-term love looked like, comfortable and steady, even if it sometimes felt more like lonely and numb. Year 3 was when the comments started. Little jabs disguised as jokes or observations. You're wearing that? I thought we were going somewhere nice. Or, maybe you should consider hitting the gym more. Kyle's girlfriend just did this intensive program, and she looks amazing. Or my personal favorite, delivered when I'd spent an entire Sunday preparing his favorite meal while he worked. It's a bit salty, isn't it? Maybe cooking just isn't your thing. I absorbed each one, turned them over in my mind, wondered if he was right. Maybe I had let myself go. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough anymore. Maybe I needed to try harder, be better, transform myself into someone he could be excited about again. I started running every morning, pushing myself until my lungs burned. I updated my wardrobe, bought the kind of clothes I saw other women wearing, the ones who looked like they had their lives together. I read the business books he kept talking about, tried to engage with his work on a deeper level. I became a project, my own personal optimization plan, convinced that if I could just fix whatever was broken in me, he'd see me again. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Year 4 was the year of promises. Each milestone came with a new excuse, a new reason why this wasn't quite the right time. After Q2, once we expand to the East Coast, when my schedule calms down, I marked time by his company's growth, not by our relationship's deterioration. My 30th birthday fell on a Saturday. I didn't ask for much, just dinner, just the two of us, just one evening where he was fully present. He agreed, made a reservation at that Italian place I loved, told me to dress up. I bought a new dress, deep green, the kind that made me feel beautiful. Did my makeup carefully, hoping he'd notice, hoping for some spark of the man who used to look at me like I hung the moon. He forgot. Well, not completely. He showed up at the restaurant an hour late, still in his work clothes, apologetic but distracted. I'm so sorry, babe. We had a crisis. A potential investor pulled out, and we had to scramble. But I'm here now, okay? Let's make the most of it. I sat across from him in that expensive restaurant, watching him check his phone every 5 minutes, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, breaking is dramatic, painful, immediate. This was more like a foundation developing a fracture, one you don't notice until much later when the whole structure starts to lean. Daniel, I said quietly, put the phone away. Please. Just for an hour. He looked up, surprised, as if he'd forgotten I was there. Right, sorry. Of course. He put the phone face down on the table, but I could see his eyes drifting toward it, his fingers twitching. He was physically present, but mentally miles away, lost in spreadsheets and pitch decks and cap tables. We made it through dinner. He even remembered to order a dessert with a candle, seemed pleased with himself for this small gesture. I blew out the candle and made a wish, though I couldn't have told you what for. What do you wish for when you're sitting across from someone who used to be your everything and now feels like a stranger? That night, lying in bed beside him, listening to him scroll through his phone even though it was past midnight, I felt something shift. Not love turning to hate. Not even love turning to indifference. It was more like love becoming a memory, something I could recognize from a distance, but couldn't quite touch anymore. Like looking at a photograph of a place you used to live, familiar but no longer home. Year 5. The year everything changed by staying exactly the same. It started like any other Thursday. I made coffee while he took a work call in the bedroom. I packed my lunch, a habit from my nonprofit days that I'd kept even after moving into Daniel's well-stocked kitchen. He emerged in his usual uniform of dark jeans and a button-down, barely glancing at me as he grabbed a travel mug and headed for the door. Late tonight, he called back. Board meeting prep. Don't wait up. No goodbye kiss. No, have a good day. Not even eye contact. Just a statement of fact and the sound of the door closing. I stood there in the kitchen, coffee mug warming my hands, and waited for the familiar resignation to settle over me. The quiet acceptance that this was my life now, this endless waiting for moments of attention, crumbs of affection, the promise of a later that never came. But it didn't come. The resignation, I mean. Instead, I felt something else, something I couldn't quite name. I set down my coffee mug and walked to the full-length mirror in our bedroom. Really looked at myself for the first time in months, maybe years. I saw a woman who had made herself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into the spaces between someone else's ambitions. I saw someone who had sacrificed her promotion, her friendships, her hobbies, her spark, all for a relationship that existed more in theory than in practice. I saw someone I barely recognized, and the woman looking back at me seemed tired. Not just physically exhausted, but soul tired. Tired of trying. Tired of understanding. Tired of waiting for a version of love that existed only in my memory of our first 6 months together. And then I realized something that made my heart skip a beat. I wasn't sad about it. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. The love I'd been nursing, keeping alive through sheer force of will and stubborn hope, had quietly slipped away when I wasn't looking. I'd been so busy trying to save it that I hadn't noticed it had already died. I called in sick to work. I never call in sick. But that day, I needed to sit with this realization, to understand what it meant. I spent the morning on the couch, cup of tea going cold in my hands, staring at the walls of our apartment. Daniel's apartment, really. Nothing here was mine anymore. I'd let it all become his, let myself become an extension of his life, rather than someone with her own story to tell. My phone buzzed. Maya, coffee? I know you're probably busy, but I miss my best friend. The quotation marks around busy were a judgment I deserved. I'd canceled on her so many times, always with the same excuses, the same apologetic tone. When had I become this person? The one who disappeared into a relationship so completely that she forgot she was supposed to exist outside of it too? I texted back, coffee shop on Pine. 30 minutes. Her response was immediate. Is this a trick? Did someone steal your phone? Just me. I'll explain when I see you. I showed up in sweatpants and an old college hoodie, no makeup, hair in a messy bun. The kind of appearance I never would have let myself have before, too worried about running into someone Daniel knew, too concerned about representing him properly. But today, I couldn't bring myself to care. Maya was already there, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. Okay, what's going on? And before you say nothing, I can tell when something's happening. I've known you since we were 15. I opened my mouth, planning to deflect, to reassure her that everything was fine. But instead, what came out was, I don't love him anymore. The words hung in the air between us, more real for being spoken aloud. Maya's eyes widened, then softened with understanding that made my chest tight. Lily. I don't know when it happened, I continued, the words spilling out now that I'd started. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was all at once. But I looked at him this morning and I felt nothing. He's been emotionally checked out of our relationship for years, but I was still there, still trying, still waiting. And I just stopped. I stopped waiting for him to choose me. I stopped holding on to who he used to be. I stopped loving who he is now. How do you feel? Maya asked gently. I thought about it, really thought about it. Relieved, I admitted. Terrified. Sad. But mostly relieved. Like I've been holding my breath for 5 years and finally let it out. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? The practical, scary, necessary question. I don't know, I said honestly. But I can't stay. Not like this. Even if he suddenly changed, even if he woke up tomorrow and became the man I fell in love with, I don't think I could get that feeling back. You can't unring a bell, you know. Maya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but I am. It takes courage to admit when something isn't working. Most people just keep pretending until they hate each other. I don't hate him, I said quietly. That's the strange part. I don't hate him at all. I just don't love him anymore. And I don't know which is worse. We sat there for hours, talking through the practical aspects. I'd need to find a place to live. I'd need to separate our lives, which had become more intertwined than I'd realized. I'd need to have the conversation, and just thinking about it made my stomach hurt. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something I hadn't felt in years, a tiny spark of excitement about my own future. Not our future. Mine. I didn't tell Daniel that day. Or the next. Or even the next week. Not because I was avoiding the conversation, but because I needed to understand what I wanted before I could articulate it to him. And also, honestly, because he barely noticed anything was different. I stopped trying to engage him in conversation about his work, stopped making elaborate dinners, stopped waiting up for him. He didn't notice, just kept living his life exactly as he had been, while I quietly started planning my exit. I called my old boss at the nonprofit, the one I'd turned down a promotion from 3 years ago. Is that position still available? I asked. Or anything similar? She sounded surprised but delighted. Lily, we'd love to have you back. Actually, I was hoping you'd reach out. We're opening a new branch, and we need someone to head up community outreach. It would mean longer hours, some travel, but the salary is significant. Is that something you'd be interested in? It was everything I'd been too scared to reach for before, too worried about how it would affect my relationship. Yes, I said without hesitation. When can I start? I reached out to friends I'd been neglecting. Accepted invitations I would have previously declined. Started running again, but this time for myself, not to fit some idea of what I should look like. Began looking at apartments, small studios that cost less than I expected, cozy spaces where I could be fully myself. With each small step toward independence, I felt lighter. Like I'd been wearing a heavy coat for years and was finally shrugging it off. The apartment felt less like a cage and more like a temporary station, a place I was passing through on my way to somewhere better. Daniel noticed nothing. Absolutely nothing. He came home late, worked through weekends, made vague comments about future plans that we both knew would never materialize. It was almost comical how I could be pulling away so completely, and he remained entirely oblivious, still assuming I'd be there waiting whenever he decided to look up from his phone. 3 weeks after my realization in the mirror, Maya helped me sign a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in Fremont. It was small, a 4th-floor walk-up with creaky floors and old radiators, but it had huge windows and space for a real kitchen table and, most importantly, it was mine. All mine. When are you going to tell him? Maya asked as we celebrated with cheap wine on my new, empty apartment floor. Soon, I said. I want to have everything in place first. I don't want there to be any reason for me to change my mind or any way for him to convince me to stay. Do you think he'll try? She asked curiously. To convince you? I thought about it. A year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have said yes, would have believed that underneath his distraction was someone who truly loved me. Now, I wasn't so sure. Honestly, I think he'll be relieved. This relationship has been more obligation than joy for both of us. I've just been the only one willing to admit it. The following Saturday, Daniel actually suggested we go out to dinner. This was rare enough that I almost laughed. But I agreed, thinking maybe this was my chance to tell him, to finally have the conversation that had been building for a month. We went to a new sushi place in Ballard, trendy and expensive, the kind of place he liked because being seen there meant something in his world. He talked about the company's latest developments, excited in a way I hadn't heard in years. Apparently, they were close to a major acquisition, something that could change everything. This could be it, Lily, he said, actually making eye contact for once. Everything I've been working toward. And I know it's been hard, I know I've been distant, but I promise, once this deal closes, we'll finally have time. We can take that trip. Start planning our future for real. There it was again. Later. Always later. The promise I'd been hearing for 5 years, repackaged with new words, but the same empty core. Daniel, I said carefully, what does our future look like to you? He blinked, surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean specifically. Not someday or when things settle down. Right now, today, what do you want our life to look like? He laughed, uncomfortable. Lily, you know I can't think about that right now. There's too much going on. Ask me again in 6 months. And there it was. 6 months. Another milestone. Another delay. Another version of not now. Something in my face must have changed because his expression shifted, a flash of concern breaking through his usual distraction. Are you okay? He asked, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. 5 years, and this was maybe the 3rd time he'd asked me that question. No, I said simply. I'm not. What's wrong? Is it work? Your mom. He was already pulling out his phone, probably ready to solve whatever problem I was having so he could get back to his own concerns. It's us, I said quietly. It's been us for a while now. He set down his phone, giving me his full attention for the first time in months, maybe years. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not happy, Daniel. I haven't been happy for a long time. And I don't think you have been either. We've just been going through the motions, existing in the same space, but not really together. That's not true, he said, but his protest was automatic, defensive. We're fine. Every relationship has rough patches. Once things calm down, when? I interrupted. When will things calm down? After this acquisition? After the next funding round? After you finally have enough success that you can stop chasing more? Because from where I'm sitting, there will always be another thing. And I'll always be waiting. You're being dramatic, he said, and I could see him starting to get irritated, pulling into the defensive posture I knew so well. You knew what you were signing up for. I told you from the beginning that building a company takes sacrifice. Your sacrifice, I corrected. Your dreams. Your timeline. But what about mine? When do I get to stop sacrificing for a future that never seems to arrive? He stared at me, genuinely confused. What do you want me to do, Lily? Quit? Give up everything I've been working for? No, I said, and I meant it. I want you to keep building your company. I want you to chase your dreams. But I can't keep putting my life on hold waiting for you to have time for me. I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into the margins of your schedule. So what are you saying? His voice had gone cold, the way it did when he was trying to control a situation. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward, the conversation I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. I'm saying I'm moving out. I signed a lease on my own place. I'm taking the promotion I should have taken 3 years ago. And I think we should end this before we start resenting each other even more than we already do. The silence that followed was heavy, profound. Other diners continued their conversations around us, oblivious to the relationship imploding at table 7. Daniel stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. You're breaking up with me, he said slowly, as if testing out the words. You're actually breaking up with me? Yes. Because I work too much. No, I said firmly. Because you checked out of our relationship years ago, and I've finally stopped pretending you're coming back. Because I've spent 5 years trying to be enough for you, and I've realized the problem isn't that I'm not enough. It's that you're not interested in anything that doesn't directly serve your ambitions. And that's okay, Daniel. You're allowed to prioritize your work. But I'm allowed to want more than this. He leaned back in his chair, and I watched the emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, anger, confusion. But notably absent was devastation. There were no tears, no desperate protests. Just a kind of stunned acceptance that spoke volumes about the true state of our relationship. When did you decide this? He asked. About a month ago, I admitted. But honestly, I think I've been deciding it for years. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself. He nodded slowly. Then, in a move that perfectly encapsulated our entire relationship, he said, I have a big meeting Monday. Can we wait until after that to deal with the logistics? I can't be distracted right now. I almost laughed. Even in our breakup, his work took priority. But instead of the familiar resignation I would have felt before, I just felt sad. Sad for him, that he couldn't see what he was losing. Sad for us, for what we could have been if he'd ever been willing to show up. Sad for younger me, who had believed love meant endless patience. Sure, Daniel, I said. Monday is fine. We finished dinner in near silence. He paid, an automatic gesture that had long stopped feeling like generosity. On the drive home, he turned on a business podcast, already retreating into the world where he was comfortable. I looked out the window at the city lights, feeling like I was seeing Seattle for the first time in years, really seeing it, not just passing through it on my way to another evening of waiting. Back at the apartment, he went straight to his laptop, something about preparing for that crucial Monday meeting. I went to the bedroom and started the process of mentally cataloging what was mine and what was his. Not much was mine. I'd let go of so much, piece by piece, until I barely had a footprint in my own life. But that was going to change. The next few weeks were a strange kind of limbo. We lived together as roommates, polite and distant, navigating around each other with the kind of careful avoidance of people who once knew each other intimately and now barely know each other at all. Daniel threw himself into work with even more intensity, which I didn't think was possible. I packed up my things slowly, methodically, each box a small act of reclamation. Friends rallied around me. Maya organized a painting party for my new apartment, showing up with 6 people and enough paint supplies to redecorate a hotel. My old colleague Sarah brought over a box of kitchen supplies. Every new start needs a good coffee maker, she declared, presenting me with a fancy espresso machine like she was bestowing a sacred artifact. This is too much, I protested. Nonsense, she said firmly. You've spent 5 years taking care of everyone else. Let us take care of you for once. I started my new job 2 weeks before I officially moved out. The position was everything I'd been too scared to reach for before, challenging and demanding and absolutely perfect. I worked with community leaders, helped design programs that actually made a difference, saw the direct impact of my efforts. For the first time in years, I came home energized by my work rather than drained by it. You're glowing, Maya observed one evening over wine at my place, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Like, genuinely glowing. When's the last time I saw you this happy? I thought about it. Before Daniel, I think. Or maybe that first month with him, before I started molding myself into what I thought he wanted. Never again, she said firmly, raising her glass. Never again do we shrink ourselves for men who don't appreciate us. Never again, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. Daniel and I had one more significant conversation before I left. It was a Sunday morning, 3 days before my move. I was in the kitchen making coffee when he emerged from the bedroom, looking rumpled and tired. The acquisition had fallen through at the last minute, a development that had consumed him for the past 2 weeks. This was the first time I'd seen him out of his office in days. Morning, I said neutrally. Morning. He poured himself coffee, then surprised me by sitting down at the kitchen counter instead of immediately retreating to his laptop. Can we talk? I sat down across from him, curious. Sure. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee mug like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. The deal fell apart, he finally said. I know. I'm sorry. Are you? He looked up, and there was something raw in his expression, something I hadn't seen in years. I thought you'd be happy. Proof that I've been wasting my time. I never thought you were wasting your time, I said honestly. Your work is important to you. I get that. But I needed to be important too, and I wasn't. You were, he said, but it sounded hollow even to him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, you're right. You weren't. Or I didn't show you that you were, which is the same thing. I kept thinking I had time, that once I reached this level of success, I could focus on us. I never realized there would always be another level. I know. Do you hate me? He asked, and for a moment, he looked younger, vulnerable, like the man I'd met in that gallery 5 years ago. No, I said gently. I don't hate you, Daniel. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just sad about what we could have been if we'd both been willing to actually show up for it. He nodded, accepting this. I saw the new job announcement. Director of Community Outreach. That's a big deal. It is. You should have taken that promotion 3 years ago. I know. I should have encouraged you to take it. He met my eyes. I should have done a lot of things differently. I just didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. There was a long silence. Part of me waited to feel something, some resurgence of the love I'd once had for him, some desire to reach across the space between us and try again. But I felt only a distant affection, the kind you have for someone you used to know well but have grown past. I hope you find what you're looking for, I told him. The success you're chasing, the validation, whatever it is that keeps you working those 18-hour days. I genuinely hope it makes you happy. And I hope you find someone who actually deserves you, he said quietly. Someone who shows up. Someone who doesn't make you feel like you're competing with a startup for attention. I'm not looking for someone, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. I'm looking for me. The version of me that existed before I tried to become someone else's supporting character. I think she got lost somewhere along the way, and I need to find her again before I can be with anyone else. He smiled, a real smile, sad but genuine. She's pretty great, that version of you. I remember her from the art gallery. I should have tried harder to keep her around. That wasn't your job, I said. It was mine. We sat there in the morning light, two people who had once shared dreams and meals and a bed, now strangers preparing to wish each other well and move on. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined 5 years ago, but it felt right. Clean. Honest. Move-out day arrived with an efficiency that surprised me. Maya showed up with her partner Alex and a pickup truck. My new colleague Marcus appeared with coffee and donuts. Even Sarah came by, armed with labels and organizational enthusiasm. Together, we packed up my life in less than 4 hours. Daniel stayed in his office the whole time. I knocked before we left with the last load. "I'm taking off," I said from the doorway. "My keys are on the counter." He looked up from his laptop, and for a moment, I thought he might say something, might make some last-ditch effort to ask me to stay. But he just nodded. "Take care of yourself, Lily." "You too." That was it. 5 years, distilled down to take care of yourself. No drama. No tears. No desperate confessions or pleas for second chances. Just two people acknowledging that they'd reached the end of their story, and it was time to start new chapters separately. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I stood in the hallway for a moment, waiting for the wave of grief or regret. It didn't come. I just felt light. Free. Ready. "You okay?" Maya called from the elevator. I turned and walked toward her, toward the life waiting for me beyond that building. "Yeah," I said, meaning it completely. "I really am." My new apartment was chaos that first night. Boxes everywhere, furniture that needed assembling, 1,000 decisions to make about where things should go and how I wanted to arrange my space. But it was my chaos. My decisions. My space. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor, surrounded by the detritus of my new beginning. Marcus, who had somehow become a fast friend despite only working together a few weeks, raised his beer can. To Lily, who just made the bravest choice I've ever seen someone make. It doesn't feel brave, I admit it. It feels like the only thing I could do and still respect myself. "That's exactly what brave is," Sarah said. "Doing the scary thing because the alternative is betraying yourself." "Besides," Maya added, "you're going to be amazing. You're already amazing. You just needed to remember that." That night, after everyone left, I stood in my empty living room looking out at the Seattle skyline. The city looked different from this angle, familiar but new. Kind of like how I felt about myself. The same person I'd always been, but with a clearer view, unobstructed by someone else's priorities. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos of Daniel and me. There we were at the gallery where we met. On that weekend trip to Portland. At his company's launch party. In every photo, I was looking at him, and he was looking at something else. His phone. The crowd. The future. Anywhere but at me. I deleted them, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I needed to make room for new memories, ones where I was the main character in my own story, not a supporting role in someone else's. The next few months were a blur of growth and self-discovery that felt like waking up from a long sleep. My new job consumed me in the best possible way. I designed programs, built relationships with community leaders, saw the direct impact of my work on people's lives. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making a real difference, not just existing in the margins of someone else's ambition. Maya and I reinstated our weekly brunches, a tradition that had fallen away during my relationship with Daniel. We'd meet at this little place in Fremont, order too much food, and talk for hours about everything and nothing. She was dating someone new, a graphic designer named Jordan who actually showed up for her, who listened when she talked and remembered the small details of her life. They asked about my mom's surgery. She told me one Sunday, wonder in her voice. They remembered it was this week and texted to ask how it went. Is that normal? Should I be suspicious that they're being nice? I laughed. That's called baseline human decency. Not everyone operates like Daniel. True. But it's sad that we've been conditioned to see normal kindness as exceptional. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent so long accepting crumbs that I'd forgotten what a real meal felt like. But I was learning. Slowly, carefully, I was recalibrating my expectations and my understanding of what I deserved. I took up painting again, something I'd abandoned in college when practical became my primary life philosophy. My apartment walls filled with abstract pieces, explosions of color that represented different aspects of my emotional journey. Maya loved them. "You should sell these," she said. "Seriously, they're good." "They're therapy," I corrected. "But thank you." Work friends became real friends. Marcus and I discovered a shared love of terrible horror movies and started a weekly tradition of watching the worst films we could find, providing running commentary and making bets on who would die first. Sarah introduced me to her book club, a group of smart, funny women who argued passionately about literature and life in equal measure. I was building a life. Not a life in waiting, not a life on pause. An actual full, rich life that belonged entirely to me. 3 months after moving out, I ran into Daniel's business partner Kyle at a coffee shop downtown. He did a double take when he saw me. "Lily? Wow, you look different." "Different good or different bad?" I asked, amused by his obvious confusion. "Different amazing," he said honestly. "You're practically glowing. How are you?" "Daniel mentioned you guys broke up." "I'm great, actually. Really great." "How is Daniel?" Kyle hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. "Honestly, he's a mess. Ever since the acquisition fell through, he's been spiraling. Working even more than usual, which I didn't think was possible. He barely sleeps. Barely eats. I'm worried about him." I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was distant, the kind of concern you'd have for anyone going through a hard time, not the desperate need to fix things that I would have felt 6 months ago. "I'm sorry to hear that. Have you talked to him about maybe taking a break?" Kyle laughed bitterly. "Lily, I've been trying to get him to take a break for 5 years. He doesn't listen. He's convinced that if he just works hard enough, everything will fall into place. But lately, he keeps saying this thing that's weird. He keeps saying, it doesn't matter anymore. And I think he's talking about more than just the company. He needs to figure out what does matter," I said gently. "Before it's too late." "But that's his journey, not mine." "He asks about you sometimes," Kyle offered, clearly fishing for information. "Wants to know if I've seen you, how you're doing." "You can tell him I'm happy," I said. "Really, genuinely happy. And I hope someday he can say the same thing." Kyle studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You really are happy, aren't you? I remember you from company events, always sort of hovering in the background, trying to blend in. But now you're, I don't know, present. Like you're actually here instead of waiting to be somewhere else." That's exactly what I was doing, I realized. Waiting to be somewhere else. Somewhere that never came. But I'm done waiting. I'm making somewhere right here, right now. After Kyle left, I sat with my coffee for a while, thinking about Daniel. I hoped he was okay. I hoped he'd find his way to something that made him happy beyond quarterly reports and funding rounds. But I also knew it wasn't my responsibility to save him from himself. That had been my mistake, thinking I could love him enough for both of us, that my patience and understanding would somehow transform him into someone capable of showing up for a relationship. You can't make someone ready. They have to get there on their own. 5 months after the breakup, my work threw a gala fundraiser. It was a big deal, the kind of event that could secure funding for the next year and raise our profile in the community. I'd been planning it for months, coordinating with vendors and sponsors, designing the program, reaching out to potential donors. The night of the event, I stood in front of my closet feeling that familiar anxiety. What should I wear? What would make the right impression? And then I stopped myself. Those were Daniel's concerns, the way I'd learned to think during those 5 years, always worried about how I reflected on him. But tonight wasn't about anyone but me and the work I'd done. I chose a dress I'd bought on a whim, deep blue with silver threading that caught the light when I moved. I'd never worn it around Daniel because he'd always preferred more conservative styles, nothing that drew too much attention. But tonight, I wanted to shine. I'd earned it. The gala was a success beyond anything I'd hoped for. Donors were engaged, the community partners I'd been working with showed up in force, and by the end of the night, we'd exceeded our fundraising goal by 30%. My boss pulled me aside, beaming. "Lily, this was incredible. You're incredible. We're going to talk on Monday about expanding your role even further." I floated home that night, buzzing with pride and accomplishment and the intoxicating feeling of being good at something that mattered. This was what I'd been missing, this sense of purpose and achievement that came from my own efforts, not from supporting someone else's dreams. When I got home, there was a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me listen. "Lily, it's Daniel." Long pause. "I just wanted to call and say, I don't know. I saw the article about your fundraiser in the Times. It looked like it was a huge success. I'm proud of you. I should have said that more when we were together. I should have said a lot of things." Another pause, longer this time. "I've been thinking a lot lately about us. About how badly I screwed things up. About how I took you for granted. Kyle mentioned he saw you a few months ago, said you looked happy. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. I guess I'm calling to say I'm sorry. And that I miss you. And that I finally get it. I understand what you were trying to tell me, about showing up, about being present. I just wish I'd figured it out before you stopped." His voice caught. "Before you stopped loving me. Anyway, congratulations on the gala. You're doing amazing things. I always knew you would if you just had the chance. I'm sorry I spent so much time standing in your way." The message ended. I stood in my apartment, phone in hand, feeling a complex swirl of emotions. Sadness for Daniel, who had finally woken up to realize what he'd lost. Sympathy for the pain I could hear in his voice. But also a firm, unshakable certainty that I'd made the right choice. Because here's what I'd learned in those 5 months of building my own life. Loving someone isn't enough if they're not willing to meet you halfway. Understanding someone's struggles doesn't obligate you to sacrifice your own happiness indefinitely. And, sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone you still care about because you care about yourself more. I didn't call him back. Not that night, not the next day. What would I say? That I was sorry too? I wasn't. I was sorry things hadn't worked out, sorry he was hurting, but I wasn't sorry I'd left. I'd finally stopped apologizing for needing more than someone was willing to give. But a week later, I did text him. "Thank you for the message. I'm glad you're starting to understand. I hope you find what you're looking for. Take care of yourself." His response came a few hours later. "You too. And Lily? I'm going to try to do better. Not for you, it's too late for that. But for whoever comes next. You taught me what it costs to take someone for granted. That's a lesson I won't forget." "Good," I wrote back. "She'll be lucky. Future Daniel sounds like an improvement. He will be. Thanks for that. For loving me long enough for me to learn the lesson, even if I learned it too late." It felt like closure. Real closure, not the kind you force because you need the relationship to mean something, but the natural conclusion of a story that had run its course. We'd both grown from our time together, just in different directions. And that was okay. 6 months post-breakup, I signed up for a pottery class on a whim. It was something I'd always wanted to try, but had never made time for, always too busy supporting Daniel's schedule. The studio was in a converted warehouse in Georgetown, full of natural light and the earthy smell of clay. I was terrible at it. My first 3 attempts at a bowl collapsed into shapeless lumps. But I didn't care. There was something meditative about working with my hands, about accepting imperfection, about the process mattering more than the product. The instructor, a woman named Carmen with clay-stained fingers and an infectious laugh, told me I was letting go of control beautifully. "Most people fight the clay," she explained. "They try to force it into what they want instead of working with what it's trying to become. You're learning to listen. That's rare." I thought about that a lot over the following weeks. How much of my life had I spent trying to force things into the shape I wanted, trying to make Daniel into someone who could love me the way I needed, trying to make myself into someone he could appreciate. All that wasted energy, fighting against the natural inclination of things, instead of accepting reality and working from there. At the pottery class, I met other people who were there for the same reason I was, to reclaim a part of themselves they'd lost or never developed. There was Robert, a retired accountant who was rediscovering creativity after a career of numbers. There was Jasmine, a recent divorcee who was building a new life, one misshapen mug at a time. We formed an unlikely friendship, bonding over our terrible pottery and our shared sense of starting over. 7 months after leaving Daniel, I woke up one Saturday morning and realized I'd gone an entire week without thinking about him. Not in an angry way, not in a sad way, not at all. He'd simply become part of my past, a chapter I'd closed and moved on from. The realization was both freeing and a little melancholy. 5 years of my life, and I'd reached a point where they barely touched my present. But that was growth, I reminded myself. That was healing. Moving on didn't mean pretending the relationship never mattered. It meant acknowledging it, learning from it, and then turning toward the future without looking back constantly. 8 months post-breakup, I went on my first date. His name was Thomas, a fellow volunteer from one of our community programs. He was kind, attentive, asked thoughtful questions, and most importantly, showed up when he said he would. We had coffee, talked for 2 hours about books and travel and our shared frustration with Seattle's lack of good Mexican food. He walked me to my car afterward. "I'd like to do this again," he said. "If you're interested." I surprised myself by saying yes. Not because I was ready for a serious relationship, but because I was ready to be open to possibility. Ready to trust that not every man would be like Daniel, that I could enjoy someone's company without immediately worrying about where it was going or how I'd need to change to keep them interested. Thomas and I dated casually for a few months. He was easy to be with, uncomplicated in the best way. He never made me feel like I was competing for his attention. But eventually, we both realized we were better as friends, and we parted amicably, promising to stay in touch. It felt healthy, adult, nothing like the slow poisoning of my relationship with Daniel. "You're different now," Maya observed one night over wine. "More confident. More yourself. It's like watching a flower bloom in time-lapse." "Gross," I said, laughing. "Please don't compare me to a flower." "Fine. It's like watching a badass phoenix rise from the ashes of a mediocre relationship." "Better." "But seriously, Lily, I'm so proud of who you've become. Or maybe you've re-become. The person you were before you tried to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's life." "I'm proud too," I admitted. "I didn't think I could do this, you know. Walk away. Start over. Be okay on my own. But I'm more than okay. I'm actually happy." "What does happy feel like?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, I know when I'm happy, but how would you describe it?" I thought about it. "It feels like coming home after a long trip. It feels like Saturday mornings with nowhere to be. It feels like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. It feels like me." 9 months after leaving Daniel, I ran into him. Not at a coffee shop or a mutual friend's party, but at a fundraiser for a tech nonprofit. Our worlds overlapped just enough to make these coincidental meetings inevitable. He looked different. Thinner, more tired, but also somehow softer around the edges. The sharp, driven intensity one remembered had dulled into something more uncertain. He saw me across the room, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he walked over. "Hi, Lily." "Hi, Daniel. You look good. Really good." "Thanks. So do you." It was a polite lie. He looked exhausted, like he'd been running on fumes for months. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes?" I glanced around the crowded room, then nodded. We found a quiet corner, away from the networking and schmoozing. Up close, I could see the changes more clearly. New lines around his eyes. A weariness that hadn't been there before. The look of someone who'd been forced to reckon with themselves. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good. Work is going really well. Life is good. I can tell. You're glowing. Everyone's talking about the programs you've developed. You're making a real difference." "That's the goal," I said simply. He was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with his drink. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About what went wrong. Daniel." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to get you back. I know that ship has sailed. I wanted you to know that I understand now. What you were trying to tell me. About being present. About showing up. About love being more than just existing in the same space. What made you understand?" I asked, genuinely curious. He let out a bitter laugh. "The company almost went under. We had a month where I thought we'd lose everything. And you know what I realized? I had nothing else. No relationships. No hobbies. No life outside of work. If it all disappeared, I'd be completely alone. And I am alone, but now at least the company is stable, so I can't even blame its demands for my isolation. I'm sorry you went through that. Don't be. I needed it. I needed to hit rock bottom to realize I'd been building my life on a foundation of sand. All those promises I made to you, about later, about when things settle down. I finally get it. Things never settle down. There's always going to be another crisis, another goal, another milestone. And if you don't make time for the things that matter, you wake up one day and realize you've spent your whole life waiting to live. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. This was what I'd been trying to tell him for years. But mostly I just felt sad for him, for the time he'd wasted, for the lessons learned too late. "Are you seeing anyone?" he asked, then immediately shook his head. "Sorry, that's not my business." "I'm not," I said. "Not seriously, anyway. I'm focusing on me right now. Figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's supportive girlfriend. Turns out she's pretty interesting." He smiled, a real smile, sad but genuine. She always was. I just was too busy to notice. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever actually love me? Not the idea of me, not the convenience of having someone waiting at home, but me, specifically, for who I was." He took a long time to answer, and I appreciated his honesty. "I think I loved you as much as I was capable of loving anyone at that point in my life. But I loved my ambition more. I loved the validation of success more. I loved the idea of my future more than I loved my present, which included you. So if you're asking if I loved you the way you deserve to be loved, the way you loved me? No, I didn't. And I'm sorry for that." It was the answer I'd expected, but hearing it out loud still hurt a little. Not because I wanted to be with him anymore, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected for years. I'd been in love with someone who was only capable of loving himself. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "It's the least I owe you. You were honest with me for years, trying to tell me what you needed. I just wasn't listening." He paused. "Are you happy now?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I really am." "Good. You deserve that." He drained his drink, then looked at me one more time. "I hope whoever comes next for you, they appreciate what they have. And I hope they show up for you the way I never did." "I hope so too," I said. "But more than that, I hope I never again put myself in a position where I'm waiting for someone to choose me. I chose me this time, and it turns out that was what I needed all along." We parted ways after that, and I felt a sense of completion I hadn't realized I was seeking. We'd both gotten closure, acknowledged our failures and growth, and wished each other well. It was the ending our relationship had needed, even if it came months after we'd actually ended things. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey I'd been on. From that first morning when I'd looked in the mirror and realized I didn't love him anymore, to now, 10 months later, standing in my own life, confident and whole and happy. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, nights of loneliness, times when I'd questioned whether I'd made a mistake walking away from security and familiarity. But I hadn't made a mistake. I'd made the bravest, most important choice of my life. I'd chosen myself. And in doing so, I discovered that I was enough. Not because someone loved me or wanted me or needed me, but because I'd learned to love, want, and need myself. 1 year after leaving Daniel, my apartment was full of people celebrating my promotion to regional director. Maya had organized the party, inviting everyone who'd been part of my journey. Marcus was there with his new boyfriend. Sarah brought her book club friends. Carmen from pottery class showed up with a beautiful handmade vase, my graduation present from her class. Thomas came too, along with his new girlfriend, both of them genuinely happy for me. I stood in the middle of my crowded apartment, looking around at all these people who filled my life with joy and support and laughter, and felt a surge of gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. This was what I'd been missing during those years with Daniel. Not just romantic love, but connection, community, friendship, the rich tapestry of relationships that make a life full. Maya caught my expression and came over, slinging an arm around my shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "How different everything is now," I said. "A year ago, I was so scared. Scared of being alone, scared of starting over, scared I'd made a terrible mistake. But look at this. Look at all these people who showed up for me. I was never alone. I just wasn't looking in the right place." "You were looking at one person who couldn't see you," Maya said gently. And now you're surrounded by people who do. That's what happens when you stop making yourself small. You make room for people who appreciate your full size. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up the remnants of the party, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. Lily, it's Daniel. I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. You've earned it. I wanted you to know that I'm leaving Seattle. Taking a job in San Francisco with a startup that's focused on work-life balance, ironically. I'm going to try to do things differently this time. I'm going to try to be the kind of person who deserves someone like you, even if that someone can never be you. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like, even if I couldn't give it to you in return. I hope you find everything you're looking for. You already deserve it. I read the message twice, then set my phone down. I didn't respond immediately. I'd learned that not everything required an instant reaction. Some things needed to sit, to be processed, to find their proper place in the story of your life. The next morning, I texted back, "Thank you for letting me know. I'm proud of you for making changes. San Francisco will be good for you. I hope you find what you're looking for too. And Daniel? You don't need to become the kind of person who deserves someone like me. You need to become the kind of person who deserves yourself. Once you figure that out, everything else will follow. Good luck." His response was simple, "You're right. Thank you for everything." And that was the last time we communicated. A clean ending to a messy chapter. As spring turned to summer, I settled into my new role with a confidence that surprised me. I traveled for work, visiting other cities to establish partnerships and share best practices. I gave presentations at conferences, sat on panels, became a voice in my field. The girl who had once made herself small to fit into someone else's life was now taking up space unapologetically, and it felt incredible. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, just enjoying getting to know different people without the pressure of it needing to go somewhere. I learned what I liked, what I wouldn't compromise on, red flags I'd ignored before but now recognized immediately. I learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely, that I could be perfectly content in my own company. But more than anything, I learned that love, real love, starts with yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in an essential way. You have to love yourself enough to walk away from situations that diminish you. You have to love yourself enough to demand more than crumbs and promises. You have to love yourself enough to choose your own happiness, even when it's scary, even when it means disappointing someone else. I stopped loving Daniel first, and it changed everything. Not because falling out of love is some kind of victory, but because it freed me to discover what I'd been missing while I was too busy trying to earn someone's affection. I found myself. The real me. The me who exists not in relation to someone else, but as a whole, complete person in my own right. And you know what? She's pretty great. 2 years after leaving Daniel, I'm sitting in my favorite coffee shop, working on a proposal for a new program that could change how we approach literacy education in underserved communities. My apartment is full of art I've created and books I've finally had time to read. My calendar is full of commitments that excite me rather than drain me. My phone is full of texts from friends who show up for me the way I show up for them. I'm happy. Not the kind of happy you perform for social media, but the quiet, sustainable, deep-in-your-bones happy that comes from building a life that feels like home. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll meet someone who's capable of showing up the way I deserve. Maybe I'll continue happily single, building a life so full of meaning and connection that romantic love becomes an enhancement rather than a necessity. Either way, I'll be okay. Better than okay. I'll be me. Because here's what I've learned. You can't make someone love you the way you need to be loved. You can't sacrifice yourself into significance in someone else's story. And you can't wait forever for someone to finally see your worth. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let go. Let go of the person who can't meet you where you are. Let go of the version of yourself you created to please them. Let go of the future you were promised, but never received. And when you let go, when you finally stop clinging to what was or what might have been, you create space. Space for growth. Space for joy. Space for the kind of love that doesn't ask you to shrink yourself. Space for you. I stopped loving him first, and that changed everything. It gave me back to myself. And that, it turns out, was the greatest love story of all. So if you're out there, reading this, holding on to someone who stopped holding on to you long ago, waiting for a later that never comes, shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's life. Let go. I promise you, the fall is scary, but the landing is soft. And what waits for you on the other side of that fear is a life so rich, so full, so authentically yours that you'll wonder why you waited so long to jump. Choose yourself. You won't regret it. If you enjoyed this story of self-discovery and second chances, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you chose yourself, or share this with someone who needs to hear this message. And remember, the greatest love story you'll ever have is the one you write for yourself. Until next time, keep choosing you.